Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Barrett Louie, part of the marketing team here at RiskIQ. We're excited you were able to join us for today's workshop. Today, we'll be diving into how to use the RiskIQ PassiveTotal API to unleash your investigations. Before we get started, there are a couple housekeeping notes. First, today's workshop is being recorded. Second, today's session will be interactive. Throughout the workshop, we'll be unmuting lines for questions and conversation. If you have a question while your line is muted, please send them through the questions window in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll answer as many as we can as we go. Now let me introduce you to today's speakers. First, Benjamin Powell. Benjamin is RiskIQ's Director of Technical Marketing and will be leading today's workshop with solutions architects Mark Kendrick and AJ Kalur. And with that, I'll hand it off to Benjamin.
Hey everyone, hey, welcome to today's threat hunting workshop. I want to thank Mark and AJ for coming today. This one's going to be a little bit different. What we're going to be doing is we're going to take an investigation and Mark is going to put it on steroids. So last week I did a use case where we investigated a known good domain and we found that there was a skimmer on there. And we walked through that investigation and I showed how we could do it for a single IP address and expand it out. Mark is going to go on steroids and really show what threat investigation can do for your organization. And when you use the power of the API, what you can do. So we're in for a great show. So I don't even know all the stuff Mark's going to do. But what we're going to do is I'm going to walk through that investigation again and show the nuances and what you have to do. And then we're going to turn it over and we're going to actually install some Jupyter Notebook, Python, different things. And we're going to jump into command line and run some queries against the RiskIQ API to pull back information and show you what you can do with it and how you can keep that intellectual property in your organization. A lot of organizations have people that have been there forever and they've seen all the problems before. So when something happens, you turn to that person and you go, where should I look? What avenue should I go down? What should I look for? But when those people leave the organization, those skills and knowledge leave. So by doing what we're going to do today, we're going to show you how you can document what happened and what you did in that investigation to quickly go back over time and rerun that investigation to see how things have changed and progressed. So it's going to be amazing. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, AJ, for being here. I'm going to quickly go through and talk about the different licenses and what you get. And I want you to see that we have a promo code. And this promo code's on every single slide. It's VRTHW-2021 API. If you use this promo code, we're going to give you additional API queries for the week because we're going to do heavy, intense API queries today, but I want you to be able to leverage that for the entire week. So normally we give you about 100 API queries when you use the promo code, but we're going to give you 1,000. So you're going to have 1,000 API queries. So you can really test it, play with it, see what happens, and try these things out for yourselves. So we want to give you those tools. Now, when you look at the types of accounts that you could have when you're using PassiveTotal, one of them is the community account, the free account. Now, if you use a free email service, we don't really know who you are, if you're good or bad, what organization you work for. So we limit some of the data and the time ranges of history that you see. So for example, you won't see services. You won't know what ports are open. You won't see the banners. But if you use a corporate email address, we'll give you those additional things because you're like vetted. We vet you that you really work for an organization. So please use that. And we give you a larger history of time. We give you 90 days worth of history instead of just 2 weeks worth of history. Now, if you have a paid account, that paid account has unlimited history. So you can go back to the very beginning of when we saw a domain or an IP address, and that could go back over 10 years. And we have advanced data sets. And so when we do some of these exercises, I try to show off the advanced data sets to show you what you can learn if you have collected all the information yourself and you know all the context and you know all the relationships with the data. So we have trackers, components, host pairs, and cookies. Now, the trackers are the little bits of code that might be running that are doing user experience, but when someone duplicates a website, they can duplicate those trackers as well. It could be like a Google Analytics code, a clicky ID, things like that. The components are what we see that are installed and running on the site. Now, this is really good because if you have a certain version of code that's running or a module that you have installed and running, and there's a vulnerability in it, we can see, hey, you have that particular version that's vulnerable, but then when you patch it and we go back, we can even show when it was fixed. So when we go through and we do some of these exercises, you're going to notice that some of these places that get compromised, we know when they're corrected because we can see that the bad stuff is removed, but we can also go back and look at the components and see if those components have changed. So if you were popped and you go, hey, I'm going to update all of my my applications and the operating system and bring it up to what's current right now, we'll see that and track it over time. Now, the host pairs are the relationships when things go in and out of a website. You might pull an image from Facebook, you might send data to Google Analytics, we see it all and we track it. So it's like, it allows us to build a map of the internet, like the relationships. Think of it like Google Street View or Maps. We can actually see what's happening there. And I apologize, my little dog is barking outside. If you hear that, when someone walks by with their dog, they bark. And then we have the cookies and we have the services. Now, why is it important to have the most amount of data possible and these advanced data sets? If we looked at the same initial indicators and you have the free account, you might be able to see the who has records, the domain, a certificate, and maybe some open source intelligence articles that are linked to it. But if I have the organizational one, I have a bigger history. So I might see that there was some malware associated with, some additional domains that were associated with that initial IP address, and I can see more. And if I have the enterprise, or if I'm using a promo code that enables the enterprise features for me, now I can see all this other data, and it gives me a lot bigger perspective of seeing the entire infrastructure. And we call this infrastructure chaining to put everything together. So here's a little bit on the licensing about how many queries per day and how many API calls. So I went through and I made it that you're going to have 1,000 API queries a day for 7 days to play with and really have a good time. So here's all the breakdowns. So if you have any questions, let me know. So if you haven't set up your account for PassiveTotal, there'll be a screen just after this it will go through. But for 30 days, if you start a trial, you get 30 days full access. But if that expires or you've done a trial before, this promo code will be for 7 days, even for accounts that are free accounts. So if you haven't created your account, go out to community.riskiq.com/registration, and you can add the promo code at that point and create your account for today. And that will kick off a 30-day trial because you will be new to the system and you'll be able to do it. If you have a free account and you ever want to upgrade to a corporate email account, you can contact us and we can move your entire history over and all your projects over to that new account if you ever need to. Now, if you already have an account, you can go to the account settings, and we're going to be going there twice today. One of them is to enable the promo code, and the other one would be to go in and take out the API credentials that you're going to need for some of these exercises. So in the upper right-hand corner, you go to account settings, and there you'll see a little pencil for the promo code. It's case sensitive, so please type it the way it is. And when you put the promo code in and you click out of there, you'll see that all of your number of queries and the things like that will change and show more information. So just bear that in mind. So we're going to be doing a lot of stuff today. And I'm going to copy all these in a minute, and I'll paste them in so you can actually see all of these different places that we're going to go. So we use Macs, Mark and I, so the examples that we're going to be using will be on a Mac and open up a terminal and doing different things. So This will be recorded, and all of these slides you're going to receive. And we even have some files that you'll download and use to kick stuff off. And then every time we do something, I'm going to copy and paste it in. So it will make Mark's life easier. He can just talk through it. And then everybody else in the audience can just use those little snippets, or we'll have a file where it's completely done and you can just follow along. So we're going to be looking at our own tools and others. So we're going to use RiskIQ, Google Safe Browsing, URL Scan.io, a way to deobfuscate some JavaScript to beautify it, and then we'll get into the Python piece, which will automate and do the investigation hopefully better than what I can do. Okay, so let me give you some background. So my name's Benjamin Powell. I'm the Director of Technical Marketing here at RiskIQ. I'm a certified ethical hacker. I've worked in IT for the last 30 years. Over half of my time now has been on the vendor side, creating security products that help the world. I've worked in the state government, local government, we had an airport, port district in San Diego, worked in university, biotech, manufacturing, financial services, and even software development. Now, one fun fact is I'm into spear phishing, but it's when I talk to people in our industry about spear phishing, no one wants to take my emails anymore. But I actually go out and swim in the ocean in San Diego and catch fish. And this was a fish I caught about 5-6 months ago in La Jolla in San Diego. So if you need to reach out to me, you have my contact information here. Please do. And this is why we're doing this particular workshop, is because I had feedback to say, hey, how can we automate this and use the APIs to up our game and jumpstart our threat hunting. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mark to talk about himself.
Hello there, everyone. I'm really glad to be part of this today. I have a little bit of a different background than Benjamin. One of the skills I don't have the ability, the photoshopping skills that he does, to take small objects in photos and enlarge them so that it makes it look like you're holding larger objects than you am. I don't have that ability, unfortunately, but I do have some other skills and some other experience. I've been about 20 years so far in software product development, working originally at a large manufacturing entity, started out doing Ajax development before I knew it was Ajax. Apparently you can do some crazy stuff in IE 5.5 when all 10,000 people in the company are using the same version of the browser. Thankfully, I don't have to do that anymore. I have been focused on cybersecurity for about the last 12 years. I've led product integrations work, and I've also owned the API product roadmap at a threat intel company, a leading threat intel company. And also, I basically have roughly 4 decades of over-engineering and breaking stuff. My dear mother figured out that at some point it was better to buy things for me to take apart than to have her house taken apart. And so after having a few times of things beeping in closets at 3 o'clock in the morning because I was hacking an alarm system, she decided that she needed to help with that. So I've been always kind of working in code and doing a little bit of things on the side, but always really interested in the place where code and business intersect. And this is really a great context for that. My fun fact here is that I listen best on ports 43 and 53, letting a little bit of my geek show there. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader to figure out what in the wide world I'm talking about, and turn that on back over to Benjamin.
So you must have seen the pictures of me catching that rabbit before, that big Texas rabbit.
Yes, that's right. That's right. The big fluffy one.
The big fluffy one that was like 5 foot tall.
Absolutely.
And another fun thing is you were mentioning how you used to take things apart. Years ago, the old school phone, the rotary phone, I took it apart to see how it worked, and it no longer rang when I got done with it. So it broke the ringer on it.
Well, it sounds like that was an improvement, actually,
yes.
if any.
It was an improvement for me, but not for the family.
Congratulations, you invented the mute button.
That's right. So one thing I want to let everybody know about is this website. So riskiq.com/threat-hunting-resources. And I want you to go to this website because we have a file here that we're going to use later on. So I'm going to drop out real quick, and I'm going to open up browser, and I'm going to go there, www.riskiq.com/threat threat hunting resources. I'm going to copy this and put it into the chat for everybody here. Give me a second. Chat. Here we go. Okay. So there's this Jupyter Notebook file, the files. And if you click on it, it will download this file and then you can open it. And there's a couple files in here, but I just want you to have it ready. We're going to use it later, but I just want you to know where it is, and you can download it. And this is a place where we go through, and I've recorded some use cases where we show how to do things, and we update this every once in a while with new use cases. It's on our YouTube channel as well. But whenever we need to give out files or do anything, they're in here. Now, we have other resources in here. So for example, there's a couple full investigations using RiskIQ that take about 2.5 to 3 hours to go through. So if you ever want to look at an open source intelligence article and see what it would take to do that full investigation, figure out anything new, there's this Dust Squad and Turla investigation that Brandon, a VP of here at RiskIQ, one of the founders of PassiveTotal, went through and did these full investigations. So there's some really good content out here. Okay. So let me go back to the presentation. Okay, so I want to ask some poll questions, and the reason why we ask these poll questions is we want to gauge the audience, because a lot of you don't talk. When we open up the mics and say, please, participate, answer questions, you don't. So we want to find out who's on the other end. So when we talk about different aspects of investigations or how to do things, I wanted to put in the perspective of you, the recipient. So Barrett, if you can you kick off some poll questions for us? Okay, so what type of PassiveTotal accounts are you using? Are you using the free email, the corporate email, or the paid email account? And the reason why is I want to be able to tell you what the differences are when we do parts of the investigation. Okay, so we have about 13% using the free email, 59% the corporate, and then 28% are the enterprise paid accounts. Okay. Okay, next question. What area of the organization do you work for? Incident response, vuln management, SOC, threat analyst. Okay, 8% are incident response, 22% are vuln management, 24 in the SOC, and 46 are threat analysts. So stuff that Mark's going to do, you probably do some of this, and you're going to love it. Okay. Okay. Has tribal knowledge of investigation left your organization? And what I mean by this is, did you have employees that were doing certain functions or did certain types of investigations and had certain skills, but they went on to other jobs or even potentially other departments, and they no longer do that for you guys? I want to know if that has happened, because when I used to run organizations, I had this one employee, and management always thought, why? What does this person do? He's just sitting at the desk. He's never doing anything. I go, he's writing scripts. He's probably doing more than everybody here combined. It was phenomenal. So he helped us keep that tribal knowledge in-house. So let's see. So 62% yes, 38% no. So you've experienced this as well. So I'm really interested to see what Mark does, because it's kind of like magic to be able to automate these scripts and do things. So I can't wait. Okay, next question. Okay, do you use the API today? Do you use the RiskIQ API today? Yes or no? Okay, 16% yes and 84% no. So we'll make sure that we go slow, we explain what's happening, and we show you the building blocks so you can take what we've done and then expand upon it. And we'll do more of these, but this is just the first one that we've done. Okay.
Here comes the final poll question for today.
Okay. Yeah, let's see. Okay. Which tools or programming languages do you use to write your scripts for the people that use the APIs? Is it Python, PowerShell, curl, Postman, or other? And the reason why we're asking is if we do these in the future, we want to make sure that we're showing you things that you're used to and trying to give you some of those examples and those different programming languages. So 57% are Python, 21 PowerShell, 4 curl, 7 Postman. So what we're going to be showing today is Python. So a majority of you are going to look at this and love it. The others, we also have, I did a webinar, or not a webinar, a workshop with CrowdStrike. So if you go to our YouTube channel, we actually have some scripts that CrowdStrike created to pull things out of RiskIQ using the API. So, and those were all in PowerShell. So that's already there if you want to look at those and utilize some of the stuff that they created with us. Okay, very cool. Awesome. So quickly just explain how we get our data, and then we're going to jump into investigations, and I'm going to go through this rather quickly so we can spend all the time with the API piece, okay? So when you think about RiskIQ, we're going out there and we're crawling the entire IPv4 space. And we act like a real user gathering this data. So when we go out there, we're checking ports, we're looking at the scripts, we're capturing the cookies, the full document object model. And with that, when that data comes into RiskIQ, we are able then to understand the context of the data. These are not feeds. We're actually going out there and gathering this data ourselves. So we see about 250,000 new domain resolutions a day, about 5.5 million new host resolutions a day, and we have over 106 billion unique DNS records, and we do about 2 billion web requests a day. We look and see about 300 new port observations, and we actually have probably one of the largest mobile app repositories in the world, looking at over 300 mobile app stores. You don't see it in PassiveTotal, but we have the data in the back end, and we do utilize it. And we have products that will look at those and see what mobile apps you have, what components or pieces other people are using of yours, or if somebody's infringing on your mobile apps or making malicious ones. So we actually have that capability. So what's nice about RiskIQ is we can do what's called infrastructure chaining. We can start off with a single piece of data and very easily grow that out to find all the different layers of resolution. So we look at the first indicators, and then we expand those out, and we start growing this out until we see the entire infrastructure of yourself or something bad. Now, one of the things that we found out is when we talk to the community, when the open source intelligence articles are published, people would come to RiskIQ and search those indicators inside of PassiveTotal. And they did this to figure out, does this affect me or not? Is there more information out there that they didn't know about or they didn't publish that I should be aware of that's related to this? And they would go through and do these investigations. So what we did was, as an organization, we decided that our threat researchers should be able to go through and take these published articles, and we will publish those indicators in a way that are easy to consume. So instead of just being a photograph of an IP address or a domain name, we actually will make it clickable or copyable that you can use. So we have those indicators. But then we would expand the investigation to say, what are the new indicators that a real threat investigator would see and understand that's related to it, and publish those as well. So when you come and look at the same article inside of RiskIQ, some articles we've gathered and published all the data and did everything, but other ones are ones that like Cisco might have done, Talos, and they say, okay, here's something on a new rat that was published, and here are the indicators that were there, but then we'll show you even more. So when we look at that, we take that initial indicators that were published and we give you even more. So it helps jumpstart your investigations or your analysis of that threat to see if it relates to you or not. This is part of enterprise. So this is part of your a paid account. You see these enterprise indicators on the articles to have and to use immediately without having to do the investigation yourself. So when all that data comes in, we have an analysis area where the researchers and the threat intel people work with the data scientists to create rules and to make those things, the ways of fingerprinting that threat or that tool or that organization, and make it in such a way that it's scalable. So we take the one thing that somebody does and we scale it. So it's kind of like what we're going to show today. I'm going to show an investigation and Mark's going to scale it. And so that data comes in then and is processed, and we figure out all the individual data pieces that we have. But then we derive some lists, like we have a blacklist. Google and Microsoft will take our blacklist and put it into production every 10 to 15 minutes. So the minute that we say something's bad, the rest of the world, 95% of the world's browsers won't go there, because Google and Microsoft is taking the data that we have and leveraging it. They're not having to go back and say, is this valid or not? They take it that, oh, this is really bad, because we do a good job at this. So we also have the ability to go back in time. So if you had, let's say, a SIM or an IPS at your organization, and you see something that's suspicious or malicious, you might create a rule and say, alert me if you see this again, but it's only from that point forward. So RiskIQ basically has a way to go back in time and roll that forward. Think of it like a time machine. And this time machine is kind of like the Doc Brown time machine with the flux capacitor to go back and set that monitor beginning of time and move it forward to find indicators. So what happens is, so for example, this is a real world example. We had a cookie, and that cookie was base 64 encoded. And they figured out, okay, this is actually the cookie value. It's base 64 encoded. Let's figure out if we see it anywhere else in the world. So what we do at RiskIQ is we have yesterday's aggregated data, which was everything going back over 10 years. And then we collect everything that we've gathered crawling from the internet. So now we have those two different data sets. Then we merge them together every day. And now we're getting to the point where it's multiple times a day. But then when we do this merge, we can now put this rule in place, the machine learning, to say, make me a new aggregate, and then let the platform use that new aggregate. So now we've rolled that thing, that detection or that way of finding these bad guys, or fingerprinting, saying these are the specific things that they're doing based upon the data, and roll that forward. So now we illuminate the entire infrastructure chain of the bad stuff and show it to you. So when we overlay this to what I just showed you, this is that process that occurs. So this allows us to be faster and smarter if we're looking at the cyber kill chain. Everything that RiskIQ does is outside the firewall, outside of your area of control, but we're seeing when things are planned, when they're talking about, like, hey, does anybody have any machines that are popped in this organization? Does anybody know how to attack this? Or I got a 0-day exploit for this. We're seeing all that stuff. And then we're also seeing when the recons are taking place, we're seeing what ports, what the scans, we're looking at the domains that are being purchased and registered. We're seeing when things are being set up and weaponized. And we're able generally to detect and stop something 1 to 4 days before it's active. So that gives you a lot of lead time that if you're using us and you have all of our products, you can see when it's been purchased, when the domain's been purchased, when now, okay, there's email capable, it's getting there. We can actually put it on our blacklist and stop it, so 95% of the world's browsers won't go there. And then the takedown takes about 1 to 4 days to do that actual takedown and get it off. Now, you're probably thinking, well, what happens when it comes back? Because generally it might. The threat actor might just move to another piece of infrastructure and bring up the same stuff again. So we keep on monitoring it. And when it comes back up, we just automatically put it on the blacklist and do that same process again. So we make it very difficult for that threat actor to do it, okay? But the way that we do that is everyone plays on the same battlefield, same rules. So everyone's on the internet, and there's signals that get emitted when you're using the internet. And if you capture those signals, then you can do something with it. So when you think about a threat actor and a targeted user, that threat actor just being on the internet, you'll see an IP address and that block their autonomous system number and their internet service provider that they're using. If they create an email, you're going to see their email provider. There'll be a subject. There'll probably be a language. You get the date timestamp. You get any attachments. You get all that information. And then when it's sent, you can see the transit blocks and addresses, the times, and then it gets to the end user. And that end user, if there was an HTML email, it might go back to the threat actor so they can fingerprint the machine. They know when it was read. They might get some geolocation information, operating systems. So there's a lot of good details in there. But this is the type of stuff that you're probably doing internally as well, as capturing these logs, having NTP set up so all the time's correct. So then you have that visibility of what you've seen inside, and we have that outside data, and we can merge those together to show you that complete history of what's happening. So the type of stuff that we have is the passive DNS. These are like the A records, the what IP address responded on this date and time. And because we can't be everywhere at once, this is one of the places where we do a lot of that collection, but we also partner with others to get that data. We share with them, they share with us, so we can see all those things. The WHOIS records, who owns a domain at that time, but with GDPR that happened a few years ago, this avenue of investigation has almost dried up. But if you look at a certificate, inside the certificate, there's facets, similar to like WHOIS, where it might be a name, an address, a telephone number that you can pivot off of. And when you pivot, you can find those relationships. So we give the certificates to everyone because with WHOIS having an issue, certificates have filled in the gap quite a bit to help you piece things together. The trackers, the host pairs, and everything that we have there. These are all the things that we do. But there's some caveats. Just because we can't be everywhere at once, so there's always gaps. If somebody did something bad and put something bad on a website, and we had checked it before they did it, and then they took it off, and we went back and checked, and we might miss it. So there's always gaps, just like in your organizations. If you rotate your logs and some threat actor did something and said, well, they rotate every 14 days, let's wait to the 18th day before we do something. You might miss it. You might not have that instrumentation to see what happened. So you need multiple points of proof to really determine if something's good or bad. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to look at things and we're going to say, that's suspicious, that's suspicious. Oh, okay, here's another one. Okay, it's bad. And now that you see that it's bad, let's now define all of these as bad, and now we can go forward and do something. So that's kind of the things that we're going to show you. And so you can do this in your own organization. So you want to make sure that you have your logs. You might even have like an endpoint protection solution like CrowdStrike and others, where you can actually go through and see who opened a file, what happened, what IP addresses were visited, domains, things like that. So you can leverage that inside-outside perspective to take what you have on the inside and what we have and merge that together to see the full extent of a threat or attack. Okay, so that's everything. And now we're going to get into an investigation. So one disclaimer I want to tell you is that what we're doing is real. It's not made up. These are not fake. It's not canned. So with that, be careful. Don't go to these places directly. If you do, you must use a tool that goes there for you, processes the data, and shows you the results, but doesn't, like, you're not actually visiting there. You have to have a gap. So you have to have that jump box, basically, that you're using before you do anything. So just bear that in mind, that this is real, okay? That's why we do these workshops. We try to teach you what's happening, what's occurring. So if you see this type of thing happen, you know how to react and what's the best way to do it, okay? So just bear that in mind, and that's the disclaimer. So last week we did this exercise. I'm going to go through it again, and then we're going to go over to the API piece, because I got emails saying, that's great, Benjamin, but how can I automate this? How can I make this repeatable, that it is done the same way every single time, so we can make sure we don't miss something, because this could be huge. So that's what we're going to do. So let's look at this. So there's a company, candlesdirect.com, and I've actually bought stuff from here before. Let's say that you work for this organization, and it's an online retailer, and if you're not online, you're not making money. So in this scenario, some payment card companies contacted them and said, hey, we see that fraudulent activity happened after people went to your website. We're blocking you. You're now on a blacklist, and you're offline. Until you fix your stuff, you're not going to work. We've already notified Microsoft and Google, so you're on that blacklist. No one's going to come to you until you fix it. So what does management do? Management goes, hey, we had a problem, we need to fix it, but we need revenue. And if we don't have revenue, none of you have a job. So the first thing we need to do is get everything back up and running. So they turn to the IT staff and they say, hey, we're offline, all hands on deck, get this fixed, get it back online immediately. So they do that, and now they've erased everything because they didn't preserve it, they didn't have the resources, everything's gone. And then they go, okay, we're back up, we have our money. Okay, let's get Benjamin and Mark involved. Okay, do your investigation. And you go, guys, what's to investigate? There's nothing left. You've cleaned up the crime scene and you used bleach on everything. What can we do? Well, now I'm going to show you what you can do. Okay, so the crime scene's been cleaned up, and you begin. Okay, so we're going to start off with this. I'm going to copy this and give it to you. Give me a second. So I'm putting this in the chat. So here's the website. Okay, it's a real website, and we bought some woodwick. Where are those? There's some right over here. These woodwick candles. It's a big wick. It kind of crackles. My wife loves them. So this is legitimate. So the website went down. It's back up. Everything's clean, and they go, okay, go. And you're like, all right, I don't know what I'm going to do. So we're inside of RiskIQ. Okay. And they said, hey, this happened like in January. It was like a couple week period of time that this was occurring, and now it's cleaned up. So since this is your own domain, you know, you look at these IPs and you go, yeah, those are our IPs. Okay. Now you see the sources here. These sources are where we got the data from. And you'll see that like some of them are Pingly, Alien Vault, there's RiskIQ, Kaspersky, there's different ones. And the reason why mine looks different than probably some of yours is that if we take a look under the account settings, I'm just going to go in here real quick. There are some sources, and inside these sources there's some check boxes, and some of these require you to have a paid or free account in order to see that data. And so if we take a look in here, this is why mine might be different, but I just want you to see that some of the information might be different. I might have a couple extra lines than what you see on yours. Okay, so that's how that is controlled. Now, for the people that are new to RiskIQ, because you have a community account, and I just want to go through and I'll talk about the interface real quick, and then we'll jump in. So this right here is 6 months worth of time. Every single number in there is a unique IP address that we've seen during that time. If you see that there's a little triangle in the corner, means that we saw something new on that day, something changed on that day. Okay, so I can easily look in the last 6 months and say, hey, the IP address changed. I can see it. If it's grayed out, that means there's no data for that, and that's because that's today and we're still gathering the data. It has been merged in and visible to you. Now there's a legend out here, and this legend shows green is routable, non-routable. So you're going internet, non-routable. Dude, if it's non-routable, you're not going to see it on the internet. How do you see it? So what happens is when we look at the whois records, there's a name server associated with it. We go pull everything from that name server. Somebody might have a name in there that says, hey, this one is a 127.0.0.1 address. It's not routable, but it's in there. And then the threat actor might say, oh, I'm going to turn it on for a little bit, and then we'll see that it's live on a public IP, a routable IP, and then they turn it back. So if we see that happen in one day, when we talk to it, we'll see it green. We'll see the non-routable and the routable. If it's just blue, it means it's routable. If it's all gray, it might be that it's, the dark one might be it's not routable at all. It's a 127, but we see that it's like staged, ready to go. And then if it's masked, means that the license that you have, we have data, but you can't see that. We're filtering that out. So you only see 90 days, you only see 2 weeks. That's what that is. And then the circles, the bottom curve means it's the end of the month. The top curve is the beginning of the month. Now, because we're in security, we are never told exactly when it's happening. We're always after the fact. We have to be able to filter data to say, hey, can you tell me what happened on this particular day or this range of days? So I can come into the interface and I can click on one, or I can hold the shift key and click on another and then see a range of IPs for that time period and see what happened during that, okay? The other thing is we might have more data than just the last 6 months. So I can come through and I can look at this data bar down here, and this is all the data that we have. And this is going back to 2010. So I can go back to a different section of time, and if I click on it, that will now filter and show me that range of dates. So I can now be very specific. So I can go back in time. And if you have the enterprise license, you can go back to when we collected data on it. So it's a time machine that you can actually go back and see, how did our infrastructure change? How did this change? Tell me about this threat actor. Was it just now, or did they have stuff in the past? So we have all that data. And if I want to go back to the where we are current, I can either click on the right side, or I just refresh the browser and it will load up the latest data, okay? So that's how you get around a little bit, so you can filter things. Now on the left-hand side, you'll notice that there's a check or an X. And if I click the check, it will then show me it will show me those things in the results. If I click again, it turns it off. If I click on the X, it will remove those items from the list. So if there's 1,000 or 10,000, you want to filter these down, this is how you can filter the UI down to give you those results that you might need. Okay. Now that we've done that, one last thing, and then we're going to jump in and start looking. So if we look at this Analyst Insights, this is where we actually do some answer some questions that might be on your mind to say, hey, this was blacklisted. Yeah, I was resolving blacklisted because we were blacklisted. It's not blacklisted anymore. That's why it shows here that it's not blacklisted. Otherwise, it would say blacklisted, which means you're currently blacklisted. Registered over 20 years ago, updated 3 years ago, you updated the whois records. There's 4 IP addresses and subdomains. A new subdomain was added 8 hours ago. So this is like some information to say, is it suspicious or not? And you'll see these colors will be different on different things that we go to. But we know that there was some sort of skimmer that was happening because they stole credit cards. And with our knowledge of that, you know that, hey, there was probably a script that was being loaded potentially on here. So we're going to look at the host pairs. So if we take a look at the host pairs, now I have some data that's in here. And I am going to look for scripts. So if you look over here, cause, I'm going to click on that green check and I click on it. And now I'm seeing all the scripts. So you can look here, the cause is a script. So the parent reaching out to a child means that this parent, the domain that we're looking at, kendallsdirect.com, went to this child and executed a script. So Google Tag Manager. So somebody's looking at Google Analytics, you know, getting that data. And as we go through and we start looking at these, there's no real way for you right now to say, well, which one should I look at? Which one's good, which one's bad? But I can look at that time range and I can see, hey, this is around that time range. So this went into effect around December when they started to see that bad stuff. That was that's when this went in, and it was taken out around the 27th. It stopped, and that's when we blew everything away and redid it. So this is probably a potential indicator. And then this one was up for just a short period of time, which is always an indicator that, hey, this might not be right if it's up for a day or just a very short period of time. So these two right here, just from those date ranges from training your eyes, could be something that you might want to look at, okay? So when you look at these, there's two different ways that I can pivot or open that data up from here. So one way is I can click on it, and if I click on it, it runs it and it gives me a breadcrumb to go back. But there's an issue with that I don't like to do, is that sometimes, if you think of a tree, and your investigation's a tree, you're at the stalk of the tree, the base of the tree, and you're going down a branch. When you get to the very end of a branch, what's there? It's nothing. So then I have to come back to the middle, go back up to another branch, and go back out again. So if I use this breadcrumb method, I can't preserve the investigation. And sometimes the investigation might take more than a day. So the way that I like to open them is if I come back and I look at the scripts and I say, okay, this jquery.su, if I open that up in another tab, now I preserve these tabs. I can save all of my bookmarks, all of my tabs as a bookmark in a folder, and I have it all, and it's all there. So it's a way for me to give this to somebody else and say, here's all the bookmarks, open it up, and they have the investigation. Or if I leave for the night, I can come back in and see it. So now that I've opened up the script, or not the script, I've opened up this website that the script ran from, I'm now saying, hey, I'm an American company. We're generally only selling in America. All the resources that we generally use are in America, but I'm looking at here and I'm seeing location information. Great Britain, China, Russia. Okay. So you mean that IT is using a resource, running a script from a foreign country, and it's something that I'm not familiar with. So that's something that's suspicious. You're going, hey, this is suspicious, but I don't have a script. I don't have anything right now, okay? So what I can do is, like, if you had RiskIQ as brand protection, we'd be monitoring your stuff all the time. And some of the stuff that I'm doing manually, we're doing automatically, and we're processing that and showing it to you. So we have JavaScript threats protection, where we're going to look at all the JavaScript, no matter how many times it changes, and analyze it, see if there's anything bad in there. So we have those products, but this is the way that you're going to manually do it. And I like to show you ways that you can do it yourself today. And it's sometimes not in our own product because you don't have access to it. So I'm trying to teach you some skills that you have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this.
Benjamin?
Yes.
Is there a way you can increase the text size or zoom your window a little bit?
Sure.
Question. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So I've increased the text size. Thank you so much. Thanks for asking questions. Okay. So this is live. It's not pre-recorded, as you can see. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Candles Direct, okay, this domain, and I'm going to use URL scan.io. Okay. So let me copy this for you. Paste it in here. So here we go. So if we go into here, there's two different ways I can run this. So when I get to URL scan.io, if I do a search from here, it actually goes out today and scans the website. It's a problem. The website doesn't have anything bad on it today. So I need to go back in time and see, did they happen to do a scan during the time period that we had a problem? So this is like that collection period. If you're not collecting the data and you're not storing it, there's no way to tell if there's something good or bad. So I have to take a chance and say, hey, does this company have data that's related to my website? And if they do, then I can go back and look at it over time. So what I did was I ran this query, and I can see, hey, 13 days ago, 1 month ago, 2 months ago, a year ago, we have these snapshots in time. Now, there was one in particular, and I'm just going to copy this one, and I'm going to paste it in so you don't have to find it in the list. okay? So give me a second. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put it in the chat. Okay. So from here, if you take a look at this right now, this shows a graphical representation of how the website looked and all of the pieces and components that were there. So we're going to look at this HTTP. Okay, so inside of HTTP, I'm going to look to see anything that went to jQuery.su. So if I do a search in here and I look at query.su, there's one item in here. Okay, so it captured all the pieces, and this is what RiskIQ do. We're grabbing this, and this is how we're able to detect this and make all the data sets. This is just another organization doing something similar that somebody's manually saying, go and scan this and see it, and that's how they're doing it. So I have this code now. And now if I look at this code, how do I know that there's something malicious in here? I can't see it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a way to deobfuscate this JavaScript to make it kind of readable, so then I can look at it and say, is this good or bad? Okay, so if I copy this, there's another website that we're going to go to. Let me give you this one, and I'll give you one other one, okay? And Beautify.io, okay? So we have these two things. You can open up new tabs for these. So I'm going to copy this data in here, and I'm going to go to this deobfuscator. I'm going to erase everything here, and I'm going to paste in that script that's all encoded, and I'm going to fix it so I can read it, okay? So now there's this little button here, and I'm going to copy it. So now I've copied it, and now I'm coming to this program, and I'm going to make it beautiful. So now that I've made it beautiful, I can actually see what's in here and what does it do. So if I'm a programmer, I can look at this and go, oh, let me see what it's doing. But let's go through and we'll just look to see if we see anything that stands out. People were stealing credit card data, so let's see if there's anything dealing with credit card data. So as I'm going through, I see there's a lot of obfuscation. But as I go down here, I see right here this section. Number, holder, first name, last name, date, month, CVV, gate, data, all this information is part of the credit card information that you would be putting there. So if somebody goes, hey, did we really have a skimmer on our candlesdirect.com? Go, yes, we did. And here's a copy of the script. And everyone will be going in your organization, how did you pull that rabbit out of the hat? Because we bleached everything. There's nothing dirty anymore. How did you figure this out? Bleach bit everywhere. It's been destroyed. There's nothing there. Built from bare metal on up. Well, here it is. And this is what was there, okay? So if I wanted now to go back, I go, now I've confirmed that this script that RiskIQ saw being executed on our website was malicious. What other malicious I can find? And potentially what other victims I could find, okay? So if we go back here, we have trackers again from here, okay? And if we look at the trackers for jQuery, let me refresh this. It's only showing 2. It should be quite a bit more. Host pairs, I'm sorry, host pairs. My brain is a little off today, okay? So I'm looking at the host pairs, what was going in and out. So if I take a look at this and I look at scripts, okay? I have all these scripts here, and then I'm gonna look for children. Parents from here. Sorry, can't do both that way. Hold on. Host pairs. I want to do the cause of a script, and you can see all the how well I work and all the things that might do, the mistakes I might make while I do this. Okay, so I can look at all of the people that were reaching out to jQuery.su, and I can start seeing some real things in here. Storables.com was reaching out to here back in 2019 for a few months. Rush My Passport. So all these Flower Explosion. So on that resource page that I showed you where we grabbed that zip file from. Flower explosion is a full investigation I did as well, similar to what we've done. So here's now we have this investigation. We've now gone through, and now I found new places that were bad. And if I take a look at the resolutions for this IP address, my machine is kind of locking up. There we go. Resolutions. So if we take a look at an IP address in here, let's see. I'll look at this 84 because that's about the time range. Okay. So from inside of here, I can start seeing other things that are in here. Okay. So if I look at Pro Cloudflare, that was also listed as a bad one. Remember, we had jQuery.su, and the other bad one was Pro Cloudflare. So if I select this one, and this was the one that was only up for like 2 or 3 days. So this is on the same infrastructure as this jQuery.su, which had that bad thing in there. So I can even go and look for this particular one on URL Scan.io and see if I can find that script. And to keep it short, it's also bad. It's the same script that's there. So this manual investigation that we just did, it's great. Find a lot of stuff. So Mark, what do you think about this?
Well, I think you might be a little bit stressed after going through all of that. So maybe you should, I don't know, light a candle or something. But if I were you, I would advise being cautious about where you decide to buy your candle from. You know, really nice investigation and a really neat sort of pathway through there. If you'd like, I'd like to show you what I was able to come up with and give you kind of a quick view of that.
Mark, 1 second.
Certainly.
Benjamin, there's a question for you. Have you ever tried Cyber Chef? It's another tool that does obviously beautifying code.
No, I haven't, but I definitely will. When we're done today, I'll try it. If it works well, I'll show it in my next one. Okay. Yeah. So Cyber Chef. Okay. So Mark, show me what you did. I want to see.
All right, so let me go ahead and change myself over to presenter, standby.
And Mark is very modest, just to let you know. So let's see what you did. Okay, I don't see your screen yet. There we go. Ooh.
So this right here is a list. If I was to scroll down and go all the way through it, it's over 100. I think about the number that you found was about 62 or so. Yeah. And this right here is in a script that if I was to just run it start to finish, it'd take about 35, 40 seconds, which is like, I don't know, 15 minutes less than what it took for you to go through your investigation. And I've gone through here, and you can see that we actually have some additional analytics that I put in here. So you were kind of estimating about how long these sites were popped for. Indeed, I've got the actual durations, right? Okay. And then if you look down here, and got a little bit of a pivot table action going on, we can kind of see the malicious site and the list of likely victims. And this is something that was generated automatically from the script. As I said, just ran a command and it's done. We don't need Benjamin. I mean, we don't need all of that manual effort that you just went through there. So does this seem like it might be something that would be useful for you?
It would be, but like the cool thing is that somebody who knows how to script and do this can take the knowledge of somebody who did investigations and then walk through and build that expertise into the script.
That's exactly right. And really, you know, this is what they call in the business an expert system, right? So this idea of creating a script, and really, folks, the way that I did this was I went through this with Benjamin before this, and I basically learned, like, how did he do this investigation? What exactly was the steps that were involved? What were the decisions he was making? And I wrote code that would enable that for a future investigation. And so it's basically taking those patterns that he had developed as being effective, because the fact is that really Benjamin already did a significant part of the hard work. The hard work is, well, I don't consider code hard work at all. I love writing stuff like this. It's a lot of fun. But the part that's fun for Benjamin and for many of you that have done this sort of analysis is this kind of pivoting and searching around. So he basically already went through the effort of finding the happy path, the path that is most effective at giving some results. What he's not showing you, of course, is all of the dead ends, all of those tree branches that he let himself out on and then sawed off behind himself. Just the usual stuff that all of us do, right, when we're pursuing lines of investigation. What this really does is it takes those optimal pathways and encodes it where anybody else could use them.
So you heard about my tree trimming capabilities as well, pruning the branch behind me. Come on.
Yes, yes, indeed, indeed. I usually only employ that when I was back in sales, right, in some of those conversations, but no.
Well, awesome. So Mark, I'll take, if you can give it back to me. Let's get everybody started with the APIs, because this is where you can take the knowledge of somebody or the team and say, what do you do when this thing? What do you do here? How do you determine this? And you can script it, and it will be really cool. Okay, so let me come back. So all of the things that we talked about and we showed, all these things will be shared with you so you can pivot through and have this and go through it on your leisure when we're done. You're going to be mailed all these slides. So here's the RiskIQ API. So I'm going to copy this real quick so you can get the documentation on the RiskIQ API. So here it is, okay? Oops. Is that the copy? And here we go. Ignore that other one. Somehow I have some code that's in there. Oh, that's a bad code. This was the bad script. So sorry, don't execute that. So now we have the PassiveTotal API. Okay, so I'll go back in, and this is where, give me a second, it started me from the beginning. There we go. Okay, this is where you can find out what command can run and what happens. Now, when you look at like the resolutions tab, the A records, it showed the country code. So when you run it with the API, I didn't know this personally until Mark was working with me. The geolocation information isn't in the API data. And I go, well, what are we going to do? And Mark goes, hey, we have you can get MaxMind for free, and that has the geolocation database. We're just going to add that piece in there, and then the data will be there and be just like it was in the UI. So there's a few things that we're going to do. You're going to need Python 3, Jupyter Notebook. You have the download that we told you about, and it's in the chat. So if you missed it, you can scroll up to the top and get it. You'll need to have the MaxMind geolocation database. You have to create an account, and you have to download the database, and then you'll be able to put it in the same path like what we'll do. And then you need to have your credentials for API access. And I'm going to show you where they are. I'm not going to click on mine because then you'll see them, and everyone in the world will be using my account. So I'm going to show you how that works.
But sharing is caring, Benjamin. Sharing is caring.
And I'm going to share where it's located, but I'm not going to care enough to let you use mine. So the stable release for Python, let me just copy this and give it to you. Okay, we're using Max, so that's what I am. My copy and paste is not working.
Or in the case of that code you paste in there, it's working really well.
Come on, Command C. Okay, here we go. There it is. Okay, and let me get the next one staged because that's going to be. I need to get that as well. I'm just going to paste a couple things in here, and then we're only going to do that first one. Okay, and
And folks, while Benjamin is pasting this in there, I noticed on there when we were looking at the different languages and tools using, a lot of you use Python, so that's great. Some of you are using PowerShell, that's cool too. A lot of what we're going to show you, you can think of this almost like pseudocode, meaning this is a way to do an investigation. It would be fairly straightforward to port these concepts over to other languages using our API or into scripts as well. Apologies for anybody out there using Perl. I did try to get that as like one of the items, but apparently we can only do 5 poll questions. So I'll just assume that you're in other, along with like, I don't know, Emacs or whatever. Benjamin?
Yeah, so you'll need to have Python installed, okay? And here's the link to it. You'll need to create your environment. So inside of a terminal window, you need to create a folder, go into the folder and execute this command, and it will create this environment, okay? And then you need to do pip install to install Jupyter, the geo IP connectors to be able to use that database, and pandas. But you will also need to download the actual MaxMine piece, okay? And this is where you would start Jupyter Notebook, but you don't need to do that just yet. But you need to go out to MaxMine, and let me give you this one. I'm going to give you these 2 links so you can create an account. And remember, everything's recorded. You can have copies of all this. You have copies of the scripts. So we're going to walk through and do it. If you don't have it installed, you'll still be able to participate and see. But if you have it installed, you're going to be able to execute these things. So once you sign up for a free account, there's a section for getting in and looking at your account summary. And under your account summary, there's this download databases section. And the one that you need is the GeoLite 2 country version. So you can just download the gzip format, and then you'll have the file that you're going to need. And that file is what we're executing to get those IP translations to the country of where they came from, okay? And then,
and just as Benjamin said there, having the file download is actually really nice. So yes, you could get this through API queries and do it online, but having it locally is really handy because of course it's very fast, it can happen sort of in real time. So this is probably something that would be useful for all kinds of the scripts you may use internally. There's lots of times that even with your own internal IDS or some other kind of proxy log systems, you may not be getting the GeoIP data in there that you'd ideally like to have. And there's a lot more than just the country code in that database. So certainly a very handy thing.
And under your account settings in PassiveTotal, there's an API access section. Now, there's a user and there's an organization. So if you have a paid enterprise account, you can use the pool of API queries for the organization or the one set up for the individual person. So if you click on show, it will show an account, which will be your email account, and then there's a very long string of letters and numbers, and that's the credential, that's the password to be able to access the API, okay? And you're going to need both of those, okay? So I would just copy those out, put them in your text editor, have them, and then we're going to be pasting those into, once we run Jupyter, and open up the file in this auth.py. And if you opened up that file, this is where you put in the username and the API key. This is where you're going to put that in. And then all the stuff that Mark's going to be doing is going to leverage those stored credentials in his queries so you don't have to type it every time or have them exposed to somebody. So if you share this file with somebody else or somebody outside your organization, they don't have your API queries to use. Right, Mark?
That's exactly right.
Okay. And then there's 2 workbooks or notebooks that we put into the file that you downloaded. One of them is RiskIQ -threat-2021-03, and then there's another one which is this THW 2021-03 without the RiskIQ, and that's the full workbook that has everything in there. So open up the one that, if you can, open up the one that's RiskIQ, and we'll build it. And you'll have that one when we're done. Or if you want to just open up the finished one, that's the finished one, right? And if you open up that initial one, this is where we'll start from, and I'm going to turn this over to Mark, and Mark's going to start from this point, and you can show whatever you need to show, Mark.
Certainly. So as Benjamin said in there, we did go ahead and provide some details on just the basics of how to get the Python environment set up. One of the things that you'll want to do, that virtual environment is certainly important. It's a way to basically keep your list of packages that you're installing. One of the great things about the Python environment is that there's a lot of really well-built packages out there. We're using the incredibly common and very helpful requests library, for example, to talk to our APIs. So you'll want to make sure that you actually go through and create that virtual environment, because what it does is it keeps those things from polluting the rest of your environment, and it ensures that if you need to, you can kind of package up those dependencies and be able to share them with somebody else. So once you run those commands and you run that Jupyter notebook, it'll open up the browser, and what you'll get is a list of files out here. And so you see I've got a few out here, including that auth.py. You can edit the auth.py file directly here if you'd like, but there are also some other ones in here just that I'll be showing you right now. And then of course that example one is this one here. So you can quickly test to see if it's working. Quick crash course on Jupyter and kind of what we're looking at. Jupyter is a tool that is used extensively by folks in data science and analytics, but it has a broad applicability outside of that. It has the ability to basically run blocks of code, blocks of Python code, and then view the output of that code directly in an interactive environment. And so what I'm really looking at here, this box is the active one. This box would be my next one. I can click and I can edit inside of there. If those brackets are empty, that means that this code hasn't been executed yet. If I hit Shift Enter, then it executes that code. So that code has been executed right now. What that means is that there exists now a variable. These things have been imported into my Python environment. My credentials are stored in a creds variable. And then I have this other block of other request arguments in here. And then we can go ahead and test to see if this is actually making an API query. I can hit Shift Enter on this. And what it's doing in this case is it's querying the account endpoint, returning back the details from my account, and basically letting me know, okay, yeah, I definitely have, I'm able to talk to the API, and it's pulling back some basic credentials. So now we know that we're able to work from this. And as Benjamin said, you have your choice. You can, if you want, keep this one here. And then as we're going, Benjamin and Ajay are going to paste in the excerpts from the script that I'm actually building that will result in that table that we showed there at the end. So if you want, you can kind of step through this live, or you can just look at the outcome from it. A final little note about the outputs inside of Jupyter Notebook. If you click the side of this, it unscrolls it, so it shows the entire bit of data. If you click it again, it'll collapse. You double click and it'll just hide that details in there. So that's a way that if you are dealing with large volumes of JSON data coming back, you can kind of collapse that and get that out of your way. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go through the entire process that it takes to be able to get us up to that level.
So Mark, what I just pasted in was the commented out config investigation section.
Perfect.
And then once you take that, can you show them how to convert it to be not executable, but just a comment?
Yeah, you mean like the output of this right here?
Well, the thing above, the number 2, that where it says number 2.
Oh, right. Yes, thank you. So one of the things that is nice in here is that you actually you can delete the cell if you want to. So you can go ahead and just hit an X to delete a cell, but this also is actually integrated markdown code. So if I double click on it, if you guys have seen markdown before, that's what this is.
And then you go up to cell and say make it markdown or make it comment or something. You have to do that, I think.
That's correct, yeah. So if I wanted to add some markdown underneath here, and I've been doing this with shortcut keys, so I have to remember where all of it's at in the menus. I can go ahead and insert a cell below. So that also might be how I could insert some code. This right here is expecting it to be code right now. If I go to cell, I can change cell type to markdown, and then I can go in here and put some kind of and then I can hit Shift Enter, and now then I've got that in there.
Perfect. Okay, great. And I just pasted in your next section where
Great. So this is the part where I get to find an excuse to insert XKCD into my demo, which is something that I always try and do just because I love XKCD. If you guys haven't seen that comic, I don't know why, but my brain, it's clearly something wrong with me. One of many things, indeed, but I can sort of index a lot of them. This is really what we're trying to do here, right? Is we have this theory that, you know what, I'm spending a lot of time on this task. I want to be able to automate this so that I can just sort of not have to, so I can have lots of free time. This is probably the reality that you've maybe had, is that it's just kind of this ongoing project. So it's kind of funny, but it also really underscores the value, a little bit of what we're doing here is we're automating this, and we are doing our best to make this something that the rest of our team can do. You know, Benjamin, I've talked with teams before. There's been a few companies that have had dedicated threat hunting teams, which is awesome, but usually the threat hunting team is like maybe somebody from the SOC and maybe somebody from maybe the Vuln team, maybe someone else in threat intel on a Friday afternoon with some proxy logs, maybe some PDNS, possibly a kegerator, and the result is threat hunting, right? But there's often some really powerful outcomes from that. The trick is getting your boss to let you do that on a regular basis. If you can find a way to automate that threat hunting activity and turn it into a detection, then you can maybe justify getting to do that more often. So that's a little bit of what we're doing here. And also, I'm just really happy that I figured out this morning how to put images directly in the middle of my Jupyter notebook. So that's a lifetime goal achieved right there. Anyway, moving on. So we're going to set up our Python environment. I am going to run each of these things individually. This is the same thing we've done before. I'll have a few little notes in here as we go. One of the things, this request library does support proxies. So if you have to query out through a proxy, then take a look at the requests documentation for that. I did try and write this in a way that if you needed to add any additional arguments, you could do so just by dropping that directly in here. Next, we're going to configure the investigation. One of the things that I'm doing here is I'm putting all of my variables up here in the top, and I'm kind of defining this as my sort of anchor host. The reason for that is because I want to make it easy for somebody to come in and modify this later on. I don't want them to have to depend on trying to do find and replace. So this is the first step in a series of decisions that I'm making when I'm writing this script about, okay, how do I make this reusable in the future? Just usually a little bit of discipline and a little bit of thought can go into making this something that can be very helpful. I'm also setting a starting date on the date range here. We're going to throw that out the window and go totally into history a little bit later on down there. But for now, this helps in some cases keep things focused. Another pro tip, take a look at the Python argparse module if you want to figure out how to pass those into a standalone script from the command line. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fetch some host pairs. And this is the first kind of block of code that you'll see where I'm actually making some API queries. You notice that went to an asterisk and then it showed the output. That was it running this API query in the background. So you'll see that I kind of follow this same pattern of code as we go throughout the script. I want to talk you through basically what's happening here. I am creating a Python dictionary that is representing the query. I know that these are the keys in that dictionary because I can see that in the PassiveTotal API documentation for this particular API query. It says that I need to pass in the domain name in a query parameter, a starting date into here, and then the direction as children. And so this is fetching the children. You saw Benjamin doing that in his initial one in there. I'm starting from this candles direct right here, and then going and finding all of the children. This next piece that I'm doing is I'm actually querying I'm using the requests, the Python requests library, to make an HTTP request, actually HTTPS, to an API. I am passing in my credentials. There is some code that's floating out there. I've seen a few people making requests that are using HTTP authentication, doing some crazy base64 stuff. There was probably a time where you needed to do that, but one of the nice things with requests is it just handles that for you. So you can just pass in a tuple, which is just a two value pair directly into your credentials. We've already set that up above, so that's passing it in right here. And then I'm passing in all of my parameters for this, which is coming from this dictionary. When I actually make this request, that's when the API happens. I then need to take a look at that response that I've stored, and I can extract the JSON data directly from this. So what this does is it parses the JSON response. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. That's really kind of what this stuff looks like right here. And it pulls that back in, and it pastes, and it gives me that into a Python dictionary. So now I've got all of this data here coming back straight from the API, 33 records, and all of the host pairs that I need. So I kind of spent a lot of time kind of talking you through that little bit of code right there. I won't spend quite that same amount of time as we go through each block in here, because I am going to try to use a similar pattern. But key learnings on this, you pass your parameters as a dictionary. We don't have to do base64 craziness for the authentication. Store your responses in variables for later reference. This is important. I'm not just executing my requests, although I could. I want to store that here because I'm going to be using that as I go on throughout my script, and I want to be able to have the option of iterating on that and exploring that. I don't want to have to keep making API queries for that. Another key thing is that if I don't clear the output of this, I can save this Jupyter notebook, and those outputs are actually saved as part of this file. So I could preserve that output in there, and it would be available actually as a variable that's ready for people to iterate on if they needed to. And then if you notice in here, I'm using explicit variable names to self-document. This is kind of a Python thing, but I think it's a good thing. Instead of using something like the letter R in here, I'm being very clear where my data is coming from, and also what the kind of the response and the structure that's contained in there. That's intentional. I'm trying to make this a little bit self-documenting. And then if you just put in a bare variable inside of a notebook, then Jupyter Notebook will interpret that by just dumping out the value for you. So that's basically what's happening here. Now let's move on with the investigation. So the first thing Benjamin did is he fetched those host pairs. One of the things I might want to do is take a look at sort of the unique source domains in there. Now, this little bit of crazy Python right here, this square brackets, is technically called a Python list comprehension. I think it's better known as a Python incomprehension because it's a great way to write code that quickly becomes utterly incomprehensible. If you find yourself tempted to start nesting Python list comprehensions, please don't. You can start getting yourself quite confused. What I'm doing right here is I'm using Python sets, which is another useful tool to have, to basically create a unique list. Later on, we're going to use the power of sets to do some other really cool combinatorial analysis of this data. But for now, I'm just pulling out some of the, so for each result that is inside of host pairs, I am looking at just simply the child for that. So now you see we've got some of just the unique domains that are in there. Now, stepping a little bit back from the code, one thing that we noticed when Benjamin was doing this is it's like, okay, hold on. One of these things is not like the other, right? I'm looking at this list and, some of these things are maybe some stuff I recognize, like maybe Google Analytics, maybe DoubleClick. Then there's some things that I don't really recognize. And, after you've done this for a while, you sort of understand which things are kind of legit and which ones are kind of not. But listen, if this is like one of you're maybe just getting started with web investigations, or maybe I am an expert analyst and I am handing this off to a junior analyst who's just getting up to speed in the team, and we want them to try to be as effective as I can. Well, how do they know which ones of these actually matter? And one of the ways that you can do that is you can look for patterns and characteristics of good analyst behavior and actually encode those. So one of the things we're going to do here is we're actually going to build a list of known sources. Now I'm calling these known, they're not necessarily safe, but what I've done is I've gone and created an array of all kinds of these that I've basically already done investigations on. So I kind of know Facebook stuff. I didn't know what this was. I had to go out and do a little bit of research to figure that out. But the act of doing that research and then coming back and putting in a list of, okay, these are probably legit, that too, taking the time to put that into this array saves my organization spending my time on that later, and it also just makes me more efficient. So take the time to do this. The result when you do that is this wonderfully tidy list. So here we go again with Python list and comprehensions. What I'm doing is I'm listing out the host pairs, but only if the child is not in known sources. So if it's not in this list, this array up here. So that gives me this set down here. And now we're starting to get, we've got basically 3 different things we can focus on. Slight pro tip for you, I'll let you do your own research on this, but if you're looking for a fun project, take a look at the TLD extract Python library, and instead of filtering on explicit host names, filter on the domain names related to these. That'll make your script a little bit more resilient as various subdomains are used to serve up scripts from sources that you're pretty sure are known already. But I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader. So one of the next steps that you would typically do is maybe just fetch some whois records and just take a look at the registrants for these. Now, as Benjamin said, whois data is of diminishing value over time, and that is for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that I'm really excited about being able to leverage all of the different infrastructure and crawl data that we have is it really gets you beyond some of those dead ends that you would have if you were only looking at a very whois-centric sort of source of investigations. And indeed, you can see right here, I am going out, let me pause for a moment, I gotta make sure I show you what I'm doing. So I'm creating a Python dictionary, that's the curly braces there, and then I am listing each of the sources. Remember what I said about the value of saving your variables in here? This is why. So for each of my source in sources, I am building a whois query. And again, the documentation would tell me that I need to put in a query parameter along with a value of the host that I want to look for. I'm then making an API query inside of here, and I am storing inside of that Python dictionary indexed by the source, which is the source host name, the results of making my whois query to the API. So this is the first time now really in our analysis that we have gone through and made a series of whois lookups to basically pull back that data and do it in an automated fashion. So instead of having to open a whole bunch of tabs or maybe just making a bunch of command lines and then maybe copy and pasting data out there, I'm getting all of it here and it's contained totally in the data ready for me to reference. The final thing, yeah, go.
Three API queries were executed for this particular
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly right. So this list, again, Python incomprehensions, right? Me going crazy down here is really just a way of listing out the various a subset of the data that's coming back and giving me this nice little analysis here. Now, again, I was kind of knocking on whois data, but the reality is that just taking a look at that output, I mean, seriously, people, like this is not good. Like, why is my website pulling data and using, not pulling data, but using resources and using scripts from companies that are not actually talking about who they are? They're not publishing their data inside of whois data. So yes, privacy can sometimes be sort of a dead end if you're actually going for attribution, but attribution isn't really as important in this case. It's simply this whole fact of like, okay, the fact that it's a private person or that it's using whois privacy service tells me I might have a bit of an issue here. So clearly something to be concerned about. Now, as it turns out in this investigation, the whois data and the registrants wasn't really essential for me as I'm going through here, but I do know that whois data is probably one of the most common starting points, certainly something I always do. And so I wanted to really demonstrate how that works. All right, so enough with Spock and his eyebrows. Moving on down here. The next step that we want to do is we want to go ahead and fetch the passive DNS data for every one of those sources. So we're going to go ahead and let this run. And what this is going to do is it's going to make 3 PDNS queries out. And in this case, I'm actually creating a list, a Python list, just an array here of values. And for each result that comes back, I'm going to append to that the results of the JSON results that come back from that PDNS query. So now I'm starting to get a lot more detail in here, and you can see that I've got for each one of these values, I've got all of the records and the IP addresses, the different resolution types in here. And as Benjamin talked about earlier, one of the things I don't have is country code. And I really want to make a kind of underscore this in that, you know, is this country code maybe something that we should look from a product perspective at including inside of our results? Well, sure, but putting myself as a consumer of the API, one of the great things of using an API is that if it doesn't include all the data you need, you're not stuck, right? You always have some other options. So there's no reason to say throw a tantrum. You can actually, here, I even have a little tantrum GIF for you there. Isn't this great? It's so awesome. I've had those days. Usually when, like, I actually had it just a few other days, Benjamin. I broke the carafe for my new drip coffee maker. It was terrible, but thank goodness to Amazon Prime, I got a replacement. So if you don't have the data in there that you need, there's no reason to pitch a fit. It's okay, there are other options. And in this case, what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually add the GeoIP data to our PDNS results. So here, I'm actually going through my PDNS sources, and I am going to add into there the GeoIP response registered country, and I'm going to take just the country code for that.
Can I ask one question? Can you show where you dropped your database in that directory structure, just so they understand where it is? So it's one up from the folder of where it was, and then you drop the database into a folder with that database in there.
That's correct. But if it's easier for you, you're welcome to just drop this into the same folder where you have your notebook. Just take this part out right here, and it should look for it just in the existing directory.
Okay.
So yeah, good point on that one. Also, you'll notice I'm using a little bit of a slightly unPythonic element, way of going through and iterating through a list here, and that's the enumerate function. If you haven't encountered that yet in Python, if you're used to languages or other contexts where you kind of do a for loop, like for I equals 0, I less than count I plus plus, which is what I do when I'm trying to do embedded C development, which is always just a little bit of an adventure. If you're wondering how you do that, this is the way that you get there. It basically gives you an index value, and the reason why I'm doing that in this case is because I'm actually updating this database, this data set in place and enriching it in there. Use care with enumerate, but it can be really useful to modify it in place. Another thing, if you haven't done a lot of coding or a lot of maybe even Python coding before, this is a pattern I recommend, and I'll talk about this briefly. I like to use a situation or a scenario in my functions or in my loops, but it's basically an early exit pattern. I'm basically looking for reasons to exit out or reason just to continue in the loop. In this case, if the resolve type that comes back isn't an IP, we're just going to continue in our loop and move on. Being consistent in this is really the key. And this is why I like this idea, because sometimes you'll get into a mix where you're like, well, should I test to, you know, if it's an IP, then I want to do this. In other places, you say, well, if it's not an IP, I don't want to do that. That can be confusing both for you and for somebody who's reading your script. Instead, choose a consistent pattern, and one of the ways that will lead you to a consistent pattern is looking for options to do early exits, and this is one of them. You'll see it come up a little later on. All right, so moving on from here, let's go on down. One of the other things we can do is we can add date analytics, and the reason why I did this is because this is another one of those expert system things. Benjamin talked about in his analysis that this has been on here for a long time, or there's a lot of countries, or things haven't spent a lot of time in these various countries. They're moving around a lot. Those are useful phrases. If you're thinking about them yourself and you're like, how do I actually put this into a script? Think about the times you're making those kinds of statements and kind of drill into that, because you can often find ways of turning that insight into actually an analytic and embedding it into code. And that's really what I'm doing right here in this block of code. So the result when I get done with this is I have a PDNS data that now has both the country in it, as well as the last seen days, as well as the dwell time. Now in this analysis, I'm not going to do something terribly crazy with that data. But this pattern of taking your base data and adding some stuff to it and enriching it is really a smart pattern to follow, because even if I'm not going to do anything with this and I share the script with one of my colleagues, well, they can say, you know what, I think I want to dig into this whole date thing, and oh, look, Mark's already done the trouble of enriching my data for me, so I already have everything I need. Be kind of interesting perhaps to do a histogram and see, you know, how long have they spent in various countries, or is there something that we can surface from that across these 3 hosts? So that's the reason for the data analytics. As I mentioned right here, probably a good idea to move that into a function if you were to start creating maybe a library of resources, with the caveat that part of the whole reason why we're doing this in this Jupyter Notebook context is because it's showing our work, right? If we want our colleagues, if we want analysts to be able to depend on the data and make decisions on it, it's sometimes useful to be explicit about it. All right, so now things are going to start getting interesting. One of the things that is an interesting perspective to look at on these is the IP addresses that are being used to host these 3 source domains. And if you remember now, we've got these 3 domains we've narrowed in on. We've narrowed in on them not because we as analysts think that they're interesting, but because we've simply carved away all the other noise. And we've now got this other set. And now we're going to try and figure out of that set, which of those are ones that we should really focus on for the next bits of our investigation. One way to do that is to ask yourself, are they related? Again, we already looked at the whois data, and we already saw that to be just a bundle of disappointment because the identity data isn't there. It's not very helpful. But again, because we have the access to this rich set of PDNS data, we can instead look at the infrastructure. Have these hosts had any commonalities in the IP addresses that they've used to host their sites now or in the past? And the PDNS data is certainly going to help us do that. We've already stored the data earlier. We've already now added in a bunch of extra data in there. The final step is to create that unique list of resolutions and to create a list of sets, of Python sets. We already saw earlier how the sets work. The result is that we've got a dictionary with that domain in there as the key, and then the value is this set of IPs. Now, this is the only place really in the script where I am explicitly using the actual values of the domains. So this is the one part of the script that maybe isn't completely reusable if we were to change that anchor host up above from candlesdirect.com to maybe something else we'd be investigating. So you'd want to make some adjustments here so that you are maybe looking at the combinatorial patterns of how these different things can be spliced together. I wanted to be really clear in how we were doing this, especially if you haven't seen Python sets before. So that's the reason for me being really explicit here. What happens here, this little and, is basically looking for a union between these sets. So this is a set right here because I was creating it up here. And this is a Python set right here. And what we're basically doing is a Venn diagram in code. And the result is that the set is empty. So that tells me that there is no common IPs in passive DNS data for the time range we're looking at between this host and this host. Well, let's try it for another variation. None there. Let's try it for another one. This is the jQuery SU and procloudflare.com. And now you see we have a nice set of IPs that are actually shared between these. Now, clearly, it'd be interesting to actually go and maybe do our investigation on all the different IPs that they've ever pointed to, but we're really trying to hone things in a little bit. This pattern of looking for intersections or commonalities among things is something you'll do often. So that's why I really wanted to take some time to kind of teach you about Python sets. Just as a pro tip, they are incredibly powerful. And so take a look at the documentation on those and definitely try constructing your scripts in a way that you can build these sets as you go. All right, so the next thing that we did, as Benjamin was sort of pivoting around in there, was looking at the host names that are pointed to that set of common IPs. So what we're going to do is for each one of those IPs, we are going to make a PDNS query for every single one of those. And so, yes, this is actually doing, about 10 or so different queries. And the result of that is all of those hosts are now, all those PDNS results are now shared in what's getting to be a pretty long list, a pretty long data structure of the PDNS data back from those. Next, we're going to flatten that down into a set of some unique host names. So this right here is a list of unique host names. Now, if you're kind of looking at this from the PDNS data and you're like, what in the wide world is all of that going on? Listen, DNS is messy. If you got a problem with it, call Mr. Vixie, Paul Vixie. He's the one that kind of created bind and got us all into this bind. And this is a little bit of a, it's just the way DNS stuff works. So you will see some weird things coming back sometimes. We can just mostly ignore that in here. I am looking only at the resolve types that are domains, so that's helping narrow this down just a little bit. And another little thing that you want to know in the way that I'm building this list is I'm using the update command. One of the quirks with Python is it can be a little hard sometimes to figure out how you add stuff to existing data structures. Do you want to use update? Do you want to use append? Do you use extend? It's useful knowing what all three of those are and how and when to use them. So definitely keep an eye on that. Really what we're doing is the update method here on a Python set is basically updating that set with all of the values from a list. And again, Python list comprehensions for the win. I'm basically putting that into there and updating that list. So now I've got this list of host names that have, and Benjamin, you correct me if I'm wrong on this one, because this is starting to get a little bit interesting. But this right here is a set of host names that have resolved to the set of IP addresses that both jQuery and ProCloudflare.com have used to host their infrastructure at one point in the past. Is that about
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So now then we are ready to search the host pairs, this time for the parents direction, and see if we can find any of the impacted sites. And yes, we are doing parents this time. It's parents, it's children, it's, PDNS data. I was joking with Benjamin as I was trying to follow his investigation on here. This is kind of like a mashup of Tolstoy and Game of Thrones, trying to figure out, which exact combination all this is supposed to go. But if this works as planned, then we should be able to pull back a list of those host pairs for any of those domains. Yeah, go, Benjamin.
Let me explain real quick about the which direction. So when you're looking at like the victim website, so the Candles Direct, it was reaching out and pulling in a script from jQuery.su. So the parent was reaching out and taking some, like your parent can take your keys to your car. But then if you look at from the other perspective, and I'm looking at from the child, when looking at the victim, the child is what you're reaching out and doing. So if I want to go from the other perspective, I'm looking at the bad things, I want to see which parents reached in and took my thing. So I'm looking at to see which parent domain was coming into my bad domain and taking the script out and using it. So that's why you change it to parent.
Exactly. And the other thing too, you'll notice I did is I commented out the date range on here. I mentioned earlier we were going to go wide on this, and this indeed is what we did. So now we've got all of this data in here, and now we're starting to see some really interesting details in here. Just in this mess of data we've got, apparently. I didn't even know they had cheesecake in Australia, but apparently they do. And that was using a resource from this tagmanagers.com. So at this point now, well, we are winning. We're starting to actually find some of the details that we need. We can now build an actual victim list. So for that, I am going to import some pandas. Pandas is a really nice little a tool set, really rich and powerful way of doing data science and some other analytics over a pretty complex set of data. I am still very much kind of like this little panda right here, learning how to use it. I have done, Benjamin, some data science before. I once put on a lab coat while building a pivot table in Microsoft Excel. I don't really understand what all the hoopla is about because the result wasn't any sparklier than before, but apparently that's something that you're supposed to do. I don't know. But in the case of pandas, one of the things that it does really well is it incorporates quite nicely with Jupyter Notebook. And so if I run this little blob of data here, then this is how I actually get that list that we saw at the start of this. So now we've come all the way through there. I'll leave most of this as something that you can kind of review on your own and kind of walk through. I am getting a little wild with Python in here, so apologies for that. You are seeing my pattern that I mentioned earlier, where I am looking for excuses to get out of the list early. So I'm kind of, if we don't have any records or if there aren't any results that come back, just keep going. If it, for some reason, wasn't a success, keep going. If it's the same host name in there, the resource space is coming from the same site, just continue. We really do only care about source scripts. So if it's not that, just continue. And then I'm creating a Python dictionary down here. One of the things that Pandas really likes is a nice, simple data structure. And when you get back with some JSON data, it can be very hierarchical and a little bit messy. Here, I'm just creating a nice, tidy list of key values. And then, again, I'll leave it for you to take a look and see what Python generators are. But that's really what I've done, is I've turned this into a Python generator, because that's what works best with the Pandas data structure. So in this case, I'm using Pandas to sort by duration descending. So that's how I got this nice little list here. Again, that's one of the reasons why Pandas is super helpful, is that after you have the data in their data structures, in this case it's in a data frame, do some neat analysis on it, and you can even do some stuff in a pivot table. And yes, I realize that it might be a little bit more fun to just maybe output this as a CSV, bring it over into, say, Excel or some other sort of a tool, and start doing some pivot tables and things in there. That's what you're comfortable with, absolutely go for it. That's what I'm usually most comfortable with, but I really wanted to try and keep this in the context of the notebook, and the result was I learned some things about Pandas that I didn't realize before, including these pivot table capabilities. So certainly encourage you to take a look at that. So, hey, Benjamin, what do you think here?
I think this is incredible. Now, one thing I'd like to do is you messed up your the MaxMind piece, but I'd like you to kick it off and clear it out and run it all as one. Can you go to the different tab or run one that you didn't mess with and try that? Because I want you to see
a live demo. Really? Are you sure?
I really do want you to show that. But this list that comes out is something that you can turn around and you can say, go and take this list and see if anybody internally has gone to any of these things, or block these sites. Don't let anybody go to these sites. Or you could take this list of victims and you can look at components and say, show me the components for every one of these victims and show me that Venn diagram where they're the same. So then you can see, oh, this threat actor is popping all of these victims because they're running these types of frameworks. These vulnerable frameworks are being exploited, and here's which ones are being exploited on these particular victims. So it gives you that capability. So if you're the vuln person, you can look at that and say, whew, do we have that with our partners? Do we have that internally? You can look at those lists. So you can leverage this information way more than if you tried to go through yourself and figure this out on your own, especially when you have hundreds of thousands of stuff that you might be looking at. So can you show me the magic now?
So it's been running, ran up to this point right here. So it's already run. I started running about when you started talking there. Now it's got that done. Now it's got the victim list done. And now then we're back to here, and here's the output. So that only took about, what, 35, 40 seconds or so, I think, to run the whole thing?
Right. Full investigation, not a partial investigation, but a full investigation. So this is why you can jumpstart your threat hunting and leverage the skills of individuals on your team. It might not be all your skills, but because it's a notebook, somebody can go in and say, oh, let's add this piece. Oh, let's look at the vuln piece. Let's do this. And everybody puts their spices into the mix. Well, when it comes out, it's better than when you began, and it's stored and it's repeatable. So the one thing that happens in threat investigation is when the investigation's on, you're ready onto a new investigation. But just imagine now, you can go back to this, and I can rerun this in a month and say, what's changed? What's new? What's updated? So now I can re-execute all these things the same way and properly and get maybe even more results because the threat actors moved on and done more. So we have 10 minutes. Are there questions? Because we went through a lot of stuff. Some of you aren't API people, but we wanted to give you the building blocks so you can see why this is so important for any organization, whether you're an expert in PassiveTotal or not, to be able to use APIs to really kick butt and do more in your office.
Benjamin, we have a question about if I have an internal process and I wanted to take advantage and use the RiskIQ API to do it, what's the proper thing to do, or how do they kick off that discussion?
Well, the internal process is probably using an internal application or something bought off the shelf from another vendor. We might already have an integration created that can leverage that. That's the first thing to check. Don't reinvent the wheel. If we've already created something or the vendor created something to take our data, you want to leverage that first to see if it answers all or some or most of your questions. You can always contact RiskIQ through the chat. So inside of the application, let me just bring this up real quick. Hey, Mark, do you mind if I show my screen real quick?
Of course, yes, go right ahead.
Okay. I am opening up the wrong type of browser. Give me a second. I opened up Safari. So have you made me presenter? Or let me make myself presenter. I'm making myself presenter. Okay. And give me a quick second. Okay. Here we go. So inside of community, most people don't know about this. If I go into, let me just bring up, I'm just going to click on something to run a query real quick. Let's see, where's the chat? Is it in here? The UI has changed. I would say the best thing is to send an email to support@riskiq.com. There was a, I don't see the chats in here. We're updating the UI. We're going to be doing some product announcements in April. And so I'm on an advanced version. So my UI looks different potentially than others. So I can't find the icon, but we had a Woopra chat icon where you can talk immediately with support. So that's one way. But contact support@riskiq.com and or success. I should mean we should contact success@riskiq.com and we'll direct you to the right person. Now we have integrations right now with Splunk, CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, many different ones. So Ajay, are there any in particular that I didn't mention that we should mention? Oh, you're on mute, AJ.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. So those are our major ones, and our PassiveTotal has a list of integrations as well that we can use. And there are, as Mark mentioned earlier, CrowdStrike published, I think it was you who published a PowerShell client with the sample code. And we have a Postman collection as well that we can use that anybody can leverage to look at pre-examples of the API calls. So that is something useful as well.
Yeah, so that one is postman.riskiq.com. So I will throw that in the chat as well. And then we had the RiskIQ API. Let me just pull that up, and I'll bring that up on the screen as well.
Do /index.html.
Here we go. Here we go. So here we go. This is all of the items in here.
Right, and it has all the API queries with example data, how the requests look and how the API responses are when they get back. So you'll have what kind of data do we get for a whois call, what kind of data we get back for a PDNS API call. So you'll have some sample responses in there. So you, at least beforehand, you can at least just look at it and say, hey, oh, okay, you have this data points part of this API endpoint. So the documentation is pretty detailed. People can simply copy paste the code and run it.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention was RiskIQ has the capability of creating a project. In the project, I can put multiple items in there. And what happens is in the background, when we see data come in for those things, we alert you. So then you can look at it and say, do I want to add it to my project and be monitored, or out of that alert, or just get rid of it? But what it gives you is the capability that you can create a project with all of those indicators that we found. And as time progresses, you can go back in and look at that project and see what changed from that time when the project was created and now, and then add those new indicators to the project and have those be monitored. So this is like what I mentioned with the script. You can rerun it a month later and find the data, or I could create a project inside the UI and put that stuff. And inside of the API, we have code that you can actually take those things and create that project for you automatically if you wanted to. So I wanted to show that.
That's great, Benjamin. I agree. The projects are a really powerful way to persist your investigations. I have some visions of some next versions of these scripts that actually takes this and writes it into a project as a way to persist that. Benjamin, in just a minute or so we have left, there was one question that came up about how to use proxies and requests. I answered it directly in the questions, but I think I want to show something briefly on the screen just to be able to kind of give people a little bit of a roadmap as to how to get there. So if you take a look at, and I pasted this into the question answers, so hopefully it came through, but I gave you a link to the Python requests library, the documentation in it, and it talks about how to use a proxy, and also some other details as to how to deal with if you need to bypass SSL authentication or use specific client certificates. And you'll see the way that it's doing this is it's basically passing in additional parameters into your GET requests, and they also show some other ones further down here. This was the reason why I built this in this way, and I'm using a little bit of an advanced Python technique here that is basically pasting in key values from any of these. So if I run this, then of course it works. If I change verify to false, then and then I run this, it'll still work, but it'll give me a warning about, hey, it's an unverified HTTP request is being made. So that's how you can actually make those changes. Theoretically, I haven't actually tested this, but hey, you know what, why not? And I'm not gonna do it here because I don't have a proxy running, but you should be able to just put into this array the proxies that you need to go out through, depending on how the authentication for that works. And it would be the same as basically giving that list here. And in fact, looking at this now, I see that probably shouldn't be a list. It should probably be a dictionary. So I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader to adjust that. But the core details for how you do that are definitely within the Python requests library.
Wonderful. So I'll take back one more time because I want to show one last slide. Screen 3, and let me bring up my. Okay. So remember, if you need to get in touch with us, you can email me. We have our contact information on the slides, or you can email success@riskiq.net, and one of us will be able to respond to you and give you information that you might need. We're here to help you. So everything we're doing is trying to help the community, because if you can train your eyes to see things and understand what's good and bad and to find these threats and eliminate them, it's gonna make the world a better place. And that's what we're trying to do with this. We don't stay within our own tools because not everybody has all these tools, and we wanna make sure that you understand what's out there, what the capabilities of what you might need to be able to do to make a difference in the world. So please contact us at success@riskiq.net. if you have any questions, you want to see any demos, you want to try something, we're here to help. And AJ and Mark, awesome. I am doing backhand springs. It's amazing what you did with that investigation. And I wish one day my skills are as good as yours to be able to automate those processes.
Well, I'm just glad to be a part of it. And as you said, it's all about finding evil. If we do our jobs well, then it makes it harder for people to exploit trust, and it makes it harder for them to exploit internet infrastructure for malicious ends. And I'm always, always happy to facilitate those outcomes. So glad to be a part of this. Thanks for inviting me, Benjamin. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And AJ, thank you so much for helping with all the questions. And if you ever, he helps out with a lot of the integration. So we had him here as an expert to answer questions in the back end. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you all for attending. Reach out anytime, like Benjamin said, to RiskIQ, success@riskiq.net with any additional questions, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.